Welcome back with the Power of Perception podcast. It is your host, Lami Hola here. Today we have the privilege and opportunity to be joined by the one and only Fahu Tahi. Thank you for joining us today, man.
Thanks for having me.
Oh man, it's a pleasure. So it's awesome. The few episodes I had, I think I talked with Shona, talked with a few guys, and when they bring up the Mount Rushmore of Utah running backs, you know, your name was always put into that conversation, and so it's a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you.
So for all of you who watch the podcast, the first question I always ask is, when's the first time you got playing the sport of football?
Oh man, it took me a little bit to think about this, but you know, it's been a couple times, you know, throughout Little League when you first started playing. But when we moved here from California, I moved up and played high school. You know, the setup of school thing is kind of different. Where ninth grade is still in middle school or junior high over here. But so my ninth grade year, I moved up to play high school on the sophomore team, and then we played Highland, and you know a lot of younger Polynesian kids that play ball, they probably won't remember the name, but Joe Kador. That guy, you ask anybody my age or in that era about that guy, he was the Ray Lewis of Utah football. And so anyways, Joe was a sophomore, I was a freshman. It was the opening game of the season, and I was playing running back, and Highland was killing us. And then I didn't have too many good runs, but the one long run I did have was on our sideline, and Joe had that pursuit angle on me. Oh, he blew me up, and it was one of those bad hits where toe touches. You know, you do toe touches, and then, you know, it was kind of embarrassing, so I had to pretend like I was hurt, so I started grabbing my back and run off the sideline. But, you know, Joe got a lot of people, man. I seen that guy get a lot of people, and I'm a victim to Joe Gato.
Oh man, that's funny. I remember in Football We Trust, I think they asked Reno, he's like, hey, so who was the best athlete of your age group? And he brought up Joe Katoa as well. Shout out to Joe Katoa, man. Heard so many stories about that guy. I wish I would have had the opportunity to play. No, man, that's awesome. So you talked about you guys were in California and you guys made the move over here to Utah. Maybe kind of go into how you were introduced to sports at a young age.
So just like Reno and Shawty and everybody, my dad was he was a big time rugby player out of Tonga in Hawaii, and before he met my mom, you know, he traveled around internationally with the Tonga's international team at a young age. I think he had played early on, 17, 18 years old. He played up, and you know, I didn't really get to see him play in his prime. He was still playing rugby when I was a little boy, and so I seen bits and parts of it. But I always hear stories about him, you know, even from you know, guys that played with him or against him, and just family members like Reno's dad. So I mean, I hear a lot of stuff about Reno's dad and my dad are first cousins. So I mean, he talks a lot about my dad as far as like his playing days and all that stuff. And then I've also heard a lot of stories about Reno's dad and how well they both played. And so it kind of started there. And then my older brother got into football. I think my dad got my older brother into playing football, and it just kind of started from there. I watched my brother play for a few years, and then I just kind of started getting the itch. You know, I always wanted to be like my older brother and like my dad. So I wanted to play football so bad, and so my first year playing as a kid was when I was 8 years old, and just never stopped.
Wow, that's awesome. You know, it makes a lot of sense now. I remember when you guys had your gifted camps, all of you guys were there. And I remember Reno, like kids were asking all of you guys like random questions, like, what about this in the league and that in the league? And someone had asked you, knowing that you played fullback at the time in the NFL, they're like, Fahu, has anyone ever got you like going head up? And then Reno like side piece from the side, like, dude, look at his head. Everyone just starts laughing. But it makes sense. You guys are close family, so there's already that relationship with that.
Yeah, Reno's, we grew up like, I was telling you earlier, how close me, him, and Shona were growing up as kids. We didn't go to the same schools, but we were about the same age. They're both a year older than I am, but it's funny because we were always together, and they were like brothers to me. And Reno, I still see Reno. Two of our boys, we have two boys that are the same age, and they play against each other. So whenever we see each other, he always still gets on my nerves. Try to joke around and clown and all that stuff, but it's always good fun, man.
Oh, that's great to hear. So, from the looks of it, you talked about you, Reno, and Shona. There was kind of maybe like family ties within, like you've seen older cousins, like, hey, like they're starting to excel in sports. And it was kind of like, okay, they are probably trailblazing a path for you so that you could be successful as well. So how was that growing up, just looking up to not only those guys, but maybe other family members as well?
Yeah. There's growing up in California, there was two guys, I think, that who I'm related to. And I think they kind of, me and my cousins in California, that we played Little League together with, we always talk about it. Because growing up, and a lot of the people my age, and older from out California, they'll know those names, Will Takeaho and Ray Tongalei. And those two were the first Tommy running backs that I ever watched play growing up. And I was about 6, 7 years old, right before I started playing. And they were kind of like the type of guys that me and Shona, the bigger type backs, can run, that had speed, shifty. And, it was, back in the days, it was kind of normal to see bigger backs and stuff like that, where nowadays it's kind of transitioned to speed, everything's speed. And those guys both had a combination of, they had everything, the size, the speed, mobility, and agility, and all that stuff. And so those two guys were kind of the ones that kind of opened my eyes to football and wanting to play running back and stuff like that. And coming here, to Utah, at the time, coming up, I think Chris Malfalo was the guy, not just in Utah, but I think around the country, for Polynesians and for big backs that you kind of just watched and were just like, man, this guy is like 260 pounds and runs just like the small backs, and you don't see that, it's rare. And so, those were kind of the guys that I had my eyes on growing up that I wanted to be like, because I kind of I stopped growing when I got into high school. I was always a bigger kid at a young age, and so people always thought I was going to be huge, playing like O-line, D-line types, because I was like, in 8th grade, I was already like 5'11", and people would think like, man, this kid's going to be a giant. But then I got to high school, I stopped growing, I already hit 6 foot, and like, that was it. So then, moved on to different positions. But in California, because I was a bigger kid, and for me to play the positions that I wanted to, I had to play up. So I was always used to playing up so that I could play running back and linebacker and stuff like that. Because if I played with my age group, they would put me on the line because I was too big, and stuff like that. And so that was kind of like the thing that coming here, we moved here right at the beginning of my 8th grade, and then I tried to play up, but they told me that I couldn't unless I made the weight, so I had to move down or whatever the stipulations were. And so anyways, that was the first time I ever played with kids in my age group, and so I was bigger than everyone. I had to play offensive line, I had to play D-line, which was different for me. And so, but yeah, those were the guys that I had my eyes on as far as like my goals was wanting to be a running back, a good running back and stuff like that. So,
Man, it's crazy to me because my family grew up in Texas, and so for us to see any Polynesian backs to be featured at Illustrated was nearly an anomaly, right?
Yeah.
And so I think over the years, we had a few guys that would come in as like a power back, but we never had an all-purpose, Polynesian back playing for Illustrated. And so we moved here in '06, '07. And then I come here and I see like everybody playing running back. And, the first thing I noticed is like, man, there's not much like speed there is in Texas. But, the power game, like everybody, there's a mindset in terms of, who hits the hardest. And I think Alembateo had said it best. He said Polynesians have turned into the bloodline of Utah football.
Yeah.
So whenever people know who players that come out of Utah, it's usually our Polynesian kids that make it out of here. Yeah. And so I kind of want to use that to transition into you start playing at, what was it, Granger High School?
Yeah.
And so kind of dive into where you probably, I feel like there's a moment you realize like, I know I can play at not only at this level, but I'm going to be able to go play D1 as well. When was that moment for you?
I don't think I realized my potential until my sophomore year. So in high school, it's pretty young. So actually, kind of rewind back. So that year that I decided that I was going to go up ninth grade and play on the sophomore team, I actually ended up starting varsity at linebacker. And so I played a couple games at linebacker, and it's funny when I run into my old coaches and stuff like that. They always talk about like how lost I look because and I told you earlier when we were talking. So I was normally younger than my own grade because of where my birthday landed during the year. So in California, they kind of pushed me I started kindergarten at 4 years old, and so I was still fairly younger. So my freshman year when I moved up and I started varsity, I was still 13. I was still 13 and playing middle linebacker, and I didn't know what was going on. I had everything where I can run, chase the ball, hit, and that's all I could think about. Like at that age, like just chase the ball and, try to kill somebody, hit them, out physical them. And so that was my mentality at that age. And so they kind of seen that they probably just kind of threw me out to the fire because I had no football IQ really. It was kind of the little league transition right into varsity.
Yeah, that's a huge jump.
And little league, you look at it now and it's just X's and O's. Hey, right here, like that, and then you get up to high school and it's just a whole different level. And they're like throwing things at you mentally, and so I was kind of lost. And so after starting, they pulled me back and they put one of the seniors in it for me to just kind of follow him around and stuff like that. And I was still doing special teams, little running back and then some linebacker. So getting back on track, I apologize. So for the freshman year, lost kid, got some varsity time, jumping into my sophomore year. So after kind of having, even being that young, kind of a disappointing year, well, our team was really good, actually. It's funny, we had the top defense in the state at the time, and, a bunch of the players, like Granger back in the days, people don't know, like young kids don't realize how big of a powerhouse Granger used to be. And to be able to be a part of that as a young kid. And so going on to my sophomore year, everything was kind of up in the air. They didn't know where they were going to fit me, linebacker, going back to linebacker, or to running back. And so I was just, I worked hard. I got in the weight room. And from my freshman year, from being 190-ish, I got in the weight room, killed myself in the weight room, and my dad would always take me and my brother out early morning running, rugby style running. And so, and then I got up to 215. So I was as a sophomore kid, being 14 now at 6'2", 215, it's kind of rare to hear kids with that size. And so going into the season, the first few games, I was playing more linebacker than I was running back and stuff like that. And then they were just kind of moving guys around, trying to find a guy to run the ball. And so while I was playing defense, and then at practices when we would switch over to I would go over there just to have fun because my older brother was still playing. Just me and him going at it. I would try to get at him, like go play scout running back, so I could try to trump my brother. And so I guess I had the coaches seen like how a physical runner that I wasn't. So they were like, "Hey, we'll put this guy at running back," And then so the third and fourth game into the season, go in. I have over 200 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns, and it just started from there, And even still at that age, like my sophomore year, I felt like I still hadn't really scratched the surface, but I kind of felt like, man, maybe if I continue to work, like I did this offseason, there could be something that comes out of this. And then lo and behold, the offers started to come in after, the end of the season, sophomore year and all that stuff, going into my junior year and all that stuff. And I think that's when it finally hit me that there was something for me.
Man, it's crazy to think that I can't remember where exactly you stand on the record list right now, but the guy who held the record for this amount of time was actually playing defense his first 2 years of high school football, right? And then because you're playing around on the scout team trying to get at your brother, they give you an opportunity, and then you have a 200-yard game with a few touchdowns, and the rest is history. So I think a lot of parents don't really understand how stressful it can be for a lot of our kids who become highly talented recruits, right? And so oftentimes parents will start making decisions in their heads before the kid even makes a decision to choose the college he's going to go to. I know from personal experiences, I have family and friends where that has happened. What was your recruiting experience? And then maybe could you shed a little light on how, not only for the kid, how to make their decisions in choosing a school, but for parents to be more mindful of how stressful it can be for these younger athletes.
Yeah, for sure. My recruiting process was with my brother getting in trouble, he ended his high school career early, getting in trouble and, being locked up and all that stuff. And so my parents never really got to deal with that until it got to me. And so it was new to all of us. And, my parents being straight from Tonga and stuff like that, they didn't understand or really know what was going on. And so they didn't really understand or really know as far as the academic part and what it required of me to. And the requirements now are so much different. Like, I probably wouldn't qualify now these days with like the curriculums and stuff like that these kids deal with. And so I was kind of a borderline kid with academics and stuff like that. And so, so going through the whole recruiting process, at the time going into my senior year, they ranked me as the top recruiter in the state of Utah. It was between me and then this defensive end from Alta High School, Ryan Bingham, who also played in the NFL. And so Ryan went on and committed early. And so, but I think for me, I didn't understand the whole commitment thing and all that stuff. And so I kind of wanted to feel out the whole recruiting thing in it because it excited me, that these schools were interested in me. And so, you get your 5 schools, your 5 trips your top 5 that you want to go to. And so mine was BYU, Utah, Arizona, Washington, Colorado. And then my first trip was to Arizona. But Arizona was the first school which surprised me with how much BYU and Utah talked to me early on. But Arizona was the first D1 school to offer me scholarship, and they were there from the beginning to the end of the whole thing, pushing. And Coach Dick Tomei, rest in peace, he's just passed away, but he was the one that that turned that program out in Hawaii with all the poly guys out there when Hawaii and Utah were going back and forth in the 80s and early 90s. That was him. And so he was doing that in Arizona. My host in Arizona at the time was Ed Mulitalo. Yeah, so yeah, it takes you back, and so I get to Arizona, and man, I love it. It's during the holidays, so there's not too many students on campus and stuff like that. But I got to meet a lot of the poly guys, and it was a trip to me because to go to Arizona and a kid that's been a homebody, never really gone out of the state other than California and Utah, and then you see how many poly guys are over there on the team, and I just kind of felt at home with those guys, and kind of gave them kind of a quiet verbal commitment to go over there, and that's where I wanted to go, even though growing up a BYU fan as a kid, but also with Utah. And so, anyways, fast forward, the next week my trip over to BYU, and then we go through the first couple of days, and my parents call me in to talk to me about well, what do you think? What do you feel like? Stuff like that. But this whole thing, it was more the communication of this whole recruiting thing. It was a lot of it was the communication went on just between me and my mom, because my parents worked together. They weren't together at the time, but my dad was kind of in and out around for this process and stuff. And so a lot of the communication was with my mom, and then I walk into my mom's hotel room to talk to her and my dad, and my mom was just asking me, so what do you think about BYU? And I was like, oh, I like it, I mean, it's home, it's close to home. She just starts crying and goes, I want you to go to the Lord's School. And that was it. And so from then, we go have breakfast with Lavelle Edwards, and my mom's sitting there crying oh, my son wants to go to BYU. And yeah, so I mean, after that, I canceled the other 3 trips, and oh man, the coaches, they were going off, and they were upset. Arizona was pretty upset, but they were good about it. They understood it. I was like, hey, you can't say no to mom, And so I ended up at BYU, and it's funny when I tell people that, people don't realize how close I am with my mom and how big of an influence she has on me, but she was the one that pushed me to go to BYU. But yeah.
Oh, that's funny. I remember having Shun and Reno on, and they both have similar experiences to yours.
Yeah.
And I thought it was funny because there are times though where kids do have this plethora of schools that are offering them, and it can be really mentally fatigued. And it's man, I don't know what school I want to go to. My mom says go here, but in my heart I want to go to this school.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And playing off of all of that, and then at the end of the day, I remember it was one of our youth leaders who was telling us, it's for those of you who are getting ready to go for school, even for those of you who are going on athletic scholarships, remember when you make your decision to go to school, don't just go on the hype of whatever the school is at. But imagine yourself living there for 4 years. Maybe you're going to find a spouse there in 2 or 3. Maybe you're going to be looking for connections in a specific field that's going to help you, maybe after your athletic career is over, or if you don't have an athletic scholarship, do they have the connections to give you the certain skill set to go and be successful in the field that you want to get into?
Right.
And so I think it's so funny because, we're on this subject, and I was like, man, it's like, as well as I did it in school, in high school, I hated everything about school and college, right?
Yeah.
And man, like I had like a 3.5, 3.6, and then my senior year, I took like all these like general election classes, so I could just show up and take tests. And then my mom was like, you know why college doesn't work for you is because you're not a hard worker. She just like clown me all the time. But I think that's something that really needs to be emphasized. Like for all these kids going out, make decisions based on who you are and not on what people want you to do.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. And like going back to what you're saying is, I think, especially in our culture, how heavily influenced the parents are in our lives. The parents are in our lives, and I was just using my experience as an example. But I mean, for me, it worked out that way because BYU was a school that I could see myself at, even at that age. And growing up, I grew up a BYU fan, and always thought about like all the Polynesians that played there. But now, seeing the other side of it, now that I'm a parent and, hoping, my boys grow up and they get that opportunity and, get to experience all of that, but also being on the side as far as having been a coach in college and seeing not just kids that have to deal with that pressure from parents and like where to go. And you can always tell the type of parents that are coming in, like what the parent wants, what they're looking at for in that program when they come on recruiting trips. And you have the typical parents that come in and the questions they ask and what is their son going to be doing this and that, playing time and all. They're thinking of oh, I want my son to get into the NFL. That's all I care about. What are you going to do? And then you get the parents that come in there and talk like, well, I want my kid, like, how good is your education? Like, what is your graduation rate? And so, like, and so that's more of what I would hope to be like, when my boys get older, or any of my kids, and we get to that point and have to work that out. Is I think more now these days, Polynesian parents, and that's just the way it is because a lot of us we come from. We come from poverty, and like we don't know. We just want success, and a lot of times we can be impatient with that like success, and we like push too much and put a lot of pressure on these kids to make it happen. When a lot of times those aren't the cards that you're dealt, and the education. I think, and that's why I try to hop on my kids too, because I just had a talk with my 12-year-old son. Because I got emails about him not doing so well in 2 of his classes. So 2 weeks ago, I told him if those grades didn't get changed by next week, that his season was over, and I was going to pull him myself. And so I don't want my sons or my kids to have to deal or go through or make choices that I did and struggle to try to make it into college if the opportunity is there. I was like, don't make it harder on yourself than it needs to be. But I think a lot of parents, Polynesian parents, should just be supportive and just know that, just be supportive and be there for your kid and help them push for their education. Because once you get that paper, I mean, in my experience, I left. So right after my senior football season, I was gone. And my priority was to go get ready for the draft, go train. And I didn't finish. I was 2 classes away. And I opted out of that last semester to chase my dreams. And after I was chasing my dreams and got to live it, and after that, I kind of struggled with the next thing in my life because I didn't have a degree. And it was so hard to come back to school. Like it's so much harder. I mean, if anything, I would tell a kid to go finish while you're there, do that, take care of that. So once you make the transition, it's as smooth as possible you have that paper, and if football doesn't work out, you transition to the next thing, have a plan already. And that's what I would tell parents just to do, is just to be very supportive and push their kids for that education, because that paper, it's going to take you far. You don't ever know how long your football career is. And the one thing that always stuck to me, my running back coach in Minnesota, he's a big influence on me in my life. We still talk to this day. And he's the offensive coordinator now for the Chiefs, won the Super Bowl last year, Eric Bieniemy. And so he's a really good friend of mine. And, he always used to remind me and tell me, I was like, everybody's one play away from being a starter. But at the same time, you're always one play away from being your career ending. No matter if it's like you didn't do good enough, an injury, right? You know what I'm saying? And so that always stuck in my head. And so the older I got and later on, after playing a few years and stuff, I used to think in my head, like, man, well, I don't know, this is such a cutthroat business. I don't know how long this is going to last. And so I don't really have a plan. And so I've tried, every time I've always tried to come back and finish school, and then I would always get caught up with something and use it as an excuse, like, I got too busy doing this in the off season. I kind of focused on my training, so I never went back to school. And so it's hard, man. And people don't realize, like, when you don't have that paper and you're focused so much on the now and like not, the big picture, like later on. It's a hard thing to do, to come back and try to find the motivation and push, like to go back and do that again. Because like you said, I didn't like school as much as you did, but like to come back and do it later on as an old man, that's even harder. So, I mean, that's the only advice I would give parents, is just to be supportive no matter what school your kid decides to play or go to. I mean, just think about the education and how well it can be for him, them, and his family, and in the future moving on,
Man, that's awesome to hear. One of the things I took away, I was like, dang, I didn't know Eric Bieniemy was the running backs coach at Minnesota at the time. And that guy, he's probably going to be up for a head coaching job. Yeah. He's killing it out there. And then to go along with that sentiment, I feel like we always emphasize our kids, man, how great it would be if you could go play in the league. And I think one thing I've noticed as I've gotten older is, there's a lot of avenues to get to a lot of different places in life if you're willing to put the work in.
Sure.
Yeah, and so I kind of want to backtrack a little bit. I sent you some of those questions, and one of them was the running back lineage from BYU. You had a lot of Polynesians who kind of set the mold or trailblazed the way for a lot of you guys to come and play. Maybe just speak about, maybe I'd say probably the pride in putting on that uniform, knowing that, all your predecessors and guys after you who've kind of taken that mantra on as well and trying to uphold that legacy.
Yeah. Well, like I said, growing up as a young kid in California, we still would watch games, and sometimes we'd have to go to the church to watch the games, the BYU games and stuff like that. But it's growing up, you think about Lake, Vi, Hema Muli, all the guys that came in before you, Mark Yatuaya, the full Bloomfield, they spent a little time over there. I mean, those are a lot of the guys, guys that I know personally, but those are guys who kind of set the way. And the crazy thing about it is that you look, but they're all different types of guys and contributed differently to the program and to the team. And you look at Lake, where he was the big type of guy who, I can more see myself the type of back that I would be as far as being a bigger back, and where I was a scat back like Reno, and so moving forward and coming up, and then so in the time when I was in high school, I get to watch, guys like that, and then seeing Reno, who I grew up with, and see him do his thing like the year before I get there, and just, a lot of people don't realize. I think because when it came out that I committed to BYU, my high school coach and like even my dad, my dad was so mad and he was upset about it, like because they didn't want to see me go to BYU as a passing school. That was BYU's reputation, a pass-heavy school. But like, while they were recruiting me at the time, my running back coach Lance Reynolds, this guy did like all his research and he was kind of breaking down when Moody was going through the recruiting process. And so his two top schools, it was between Michigan and BYU. And so he kind of sat me down with my parents and had the same talk. And like he was breaking down stats and touches versus like the type of offense they run with, running and catching the ball. And so, he had to do the same thing with me, with the running backs at Arizona and Nebraska and all that stuff, and how they fit into the scheme and stuff. And so, but I don't think anybody realizes how much, at the time with Lavelle Edwards, how much the running back is utilized in that offense. I mean, it looks like a pass-heavy offense because there's only ever been like quarterbacks and O-linemen that have made it far into the NFL and stuff like that from BYU, but as far as touches and stuff like that, catches and runs and all that stuff, the combination, it didn't compare at the time. And so, I mean, watching those guys do that and then Reno coming in, it excited me. I was happy for Reno and I was excited to see actually someone that I was so close to. I mean, like I said, I named all those guys and I know them personally and have met them through my career at BYU or throughout my life and stuff like that. But it was just different to see Reno go out and do his thing and just kind of get you excited, like, man, I could be over there too doing the same thing. And so from when I got to BYU, coming in as a true freshman, I started our first game as a true freshman, and at the time we came in, my recruiting class, it was both me and Luke Staley. Excuse me. So both me and Luke, we were kind of playing the 1-2 back in a 2-back system they were trying to put together. And so BYU, they were good at it because they dealt with it before, kind of like two different type backs and stuff like that both. So anyways, started my freshman year, I have a good year. Dealt with a couple of injuries, but still led the team in rushing the end of the year. And then go on my mission, come back, and then play my last 3 years, 03, 04, and 05. And I think through that time, BYU still had the mentality of the big ponies and back that can catch and run and stuff like that. And, during that time, I had to play a year with Fui and then Manasseh, and then Harvey comes afterward. Harvey comes in my senior year, he's redshirting and stuff like that, and it just kind of, went year after year and then almost like it did back then, back in the 90s and stuff like that. And so it was fun to kind of see in that era, I was kind of like the older guy, the older brother that those guys looked to, and kind of, I guess, set the standard as far as bringing that type of style and play back to BYU's offense and stuff like that, as far as the catching back, the physical back, and blocking and doing all that stuff. And so, Fui, Manasseh, and Harvey, we were all built the same. We were all just bigger guys that could run and stuff. And so, I think it's nice to look back and watch BYU now, and they're trying to get back to that almost. Seems we got Lopini over there, and he's doing a great job. Lopini Katoa and then also Tyler Algier, who are both Polynesian backs. And it's fun to watch those two guys play in the 2-back rotation that they got going on. Because even though they're both big backs, Lopini being the smaller one, he's still a 210 running back. That's still big, you know. And then Tyler Algier, he's 230. And so I'm glad to see that finally come to get back. Like I think BYU for a few years started to get away from that and started to get to like
to finesse in the sense.
Yeah. But like to what everybody else is doing. And you know, there's no disrespect to BYU and as far as recruiting, but like, you know, that's for like, you know, the Oregons and, you know, all the other schools that have been doing the speed thing with scat backs and all that stuff. But like what BYU has been known for is recruiting those type of backs that can do it all.
Yeah.
Because they can still come out of the shotgun, still take a handoff, and still do all those things. And that's what made BYU tough to scout against. Because you know, usually when you're scouting teams and stuff like that, you know what type of backs they're going to use in types of situations. You know, in certain situations, short yardage, first, second down, and all that stuff to break it down. But with guys like that who can do it all, you just never know what they're going to do because they stay on the field all the time. You know. Mm-hmm. And so, but it's been fun to watch. It's been fun to see that whole thing grow. And it was fun during the time when I was there and got to take like Fui and Manasseh and Harvey under my wing and just kind of, you know, be the example to those guys and kind of show them the ropes and all that stuff.
No, man, that's great to hear. I was sitting here thinking how much of a blessing it was probably for you to be in a system like that because, you know, you go to what was called an area at BYU, but they utilized you in so many different ways, which probably prepared you from whenever you made your transition from college to the NFL.
Exactly.
Because a lot of fullbacks probably coming in, they were used to, you know, not only protection, but also, you know, being able to catch the ball out of the backfield and doing little things like that. And so maybe talk about how was the transition of you coming from BYU, being a running back, and now a running back turned fullback into the NFL, and that whole entire process.
Yeah, it was different because I did a little of the blocking, especially when there would be like Fui's freshman year, and me and him would switch off blocking for each other. So I got to experience it a little bit, but like, you know, moving on from being a full-time running back at BYU and then transitioning over to when I got to Cincinnati my rookie year, and to be, because, you know, going through that whole process of getting ready for the combine and stuff like that, and like, you know, my agent telling me that all these teams, there's some teams that are looking at you to be a big down back, but mostly a fullback and know that you can run the ball, and so that's a huge plus for you. And some teams are just looking at you just to block, you know. And so I think going to Cincinnati, but I mean, he was trying to, I guess, keep my hopes up of, you know, getting a little bit of care. But I already knew that it was going to be a full-time lead blocking situation. And so I kind of had to change my mindset and stuff like that. And take the physicalness, like the part of it, my running style, and turn it into staying physical, but without the ball.
Yeah.
And just knowing that there's no glory in it, you know what I mean? And, you know, at first you think as a young kid, like, that sucks, you know? But, like, I mean, at this time, you have to kind of change your thinking. And I was like, well, you know, this is my dream, and I've got to do everything I got to do to make this team. Not only that, I didn't finish school and I don't have a job, so I need money. And so those were kind of desperate times for me. And I had a really, really good camp going into Cincinnati. And I think they didn't expect any of that of it. My whole situation as far as going to the draft was kind of a disappointment. And then coming out like I was the number one, number two guy on a lot of lists, and projected to get drafted from the middle rounds to the late rounds and then not even getting a call, you know, was kind of disappointing. And so that kind of switched everything in my head. And I knew it was very humbling, but also very good because I knew I needed it. And if I didn't go through that, I probably wouldn't have made the team. And so just switching that mentality, and my thinking is I had to be physical, be hungry, and just go back to day one lessons that I learned from my parents and was to work hard. And that's what I did. And so it's funny, I just had the reputation of going into Cincinnati and camp as like a killer. Because I was trying to kill everybody and everybody that came in my way. And like, it's funny, I don't know if you know the name David Pollock. He's a college football analyst now for ESPN. So he was a first round pick to Cincinnati the year before I got there and playing linebacker. And that guy, he hated me. And like, you talk about a guy that whined and cried, like hated, and that you hit him and stuff like that, and he would be like, bro, what are you, like, dude, serious? Like, type of stuff. I'm like, hey, man, I don't got money like you. I gotta eat too, you know what I mean? And so that was my mentality. It was just like, you're not there to make friends and stuff like that, but that was the mentality that I had to keep for me to stay successful and continue to do well. But it's definitely a transition coming from running back to fullback and not ever touching the ball, hardly ever. Maybe catching the ball here and there in the flats, but you definitely got to change your whole thinking of it because in that position, it's a dying position. But if you can't turn it on like mentally, like to be a dog, to be in that position, you ain't gonna make it very long.
Man, with that being said, I have a story that I'll share with you afterwards. But, talking about, what you had to do to you probably had to go to a dark place mentally to be like, hey man, whatever I can find, I'm just going to make this work no matter what. So I read that you were with the Bengals and then you tried out and then eventually you got signed on with the Minnesota Vikings.
Mm-hmm.
In that gap in between time, was it a quick transition where the Vikings picked you up right away, or was there like a little downtime and then you had to stay in shape and then finally make your way over there?
No, it all happened quick. And so, how it first started was I had a bunch of teams calling, trying to get me to camp and stuff like that after. And so, but I was so upset about how the draft went. I just said yes to the first team that called. And the Bengals were never in the picture as far as talking to me during the draft and like all that stuff. I had no idea they were ever interested. Because the main teams that were calling me were the Patriots, Chicago Bears, the Dolphins, the Rams, and stuff like that, who were saying that they were going to draft me. And then I was so upset after that happened, Cincinnati calls, and I just said, yeah, I went to camp, yeah, whatever, and everything I just told you, going through camp and having a really good camp. And so they didn't want to cut me, but like it's rare for teams to keep two fullbacks just because they've been a dying position. And you look on the roster now, there's probably half the teams that keep a fullback on the roster. And so it's unusual for a team to keep two, but they couldn't cut the other guy in front of me, even though I had outperformed him, because they just paid him the year before. And that's where all the business comes in and stuff like that, where they're trying to make everybody fit. And so at the time, he was one of the highest paid fullbacks at the time, and they were not about to like cut him over some guy, like a walk-on guy, And so anyways, my agent had told me there had been teams calling about me. I started off on their practice squad from there and then started to travel with them and doing all that on the roster. But it happened so fast. So when Minnesota came into the picture, I left Cincinnati straight to Minnesota at the end of the season. And so I go to Minnesota, and then, it was kind of the fullback that they had there was on his way out, older guy, and then it just worked out that way. But it was kind of, but I had to start all over again because I think a lot of the teammates, just from talk, they were kind of upset that they, came after me, like put up like other players to come and get me to come over there, like cut a couple other guys just to open up a spot that I could come into. And so, I mean, just, from hearing over talk and like, they were like, man, we did this for a fullback, And so I felt like I had to prove myself again. And, same thing going through Minnesota because I didn't know anybody there. They didn't know me and all that stuff. But, I mean, there wasn't really any downtime. It was just from pick up and leave from Cincinnati and start practice the very next day out in Minnesota.
So you said that there was a few doubters when you first got to Minnesota. At what point did you feel like you got the validation of your teammates while you were playing in Minnesota?
It was that first camp that I went in with them, and there still wasn't any. They didn't really know who I was or really cared to know who I was and stuff. I think there were still questions like, man, I can't believe we gave up a couple spots for this guy to come over here. And so, I mean, and I knew it. I mean, and I just kind of felt that way just from the guys, being around the guys in the locker room. And so, during that first camp that I had with them, I took the same mentality that I had with me in Cincinnati. And it was like I was going to kill everybody. And then one of our first scrimmages, there was a linebacker, I don't even know the guy's name, but he came around on the toss on the blitz, and like I hit him so hard, like this dude like on the field it looked like he did a cartwheel. And so, but that's how mad I was. But then from that day on, because I go in the locker room and then everybody's like, "Dang, Tahi," and then from then that was it, And so
that's awesome. So you make it to Minnesota. Being from Texas, watching Adrian Peterson grow up. I always hated him because I was a Longhorns fan, but see him tear up my team pretty much year in, year out. What was the experience like playing with that caliber of athlete?
Man, I still tell people to this day, there is no athlete that I've ever been around like the guy. Not just football player, like athlete. And the guy's worked at, and he was blessed with great genes. I mean, I was close with him, met both his parents. Both his parents were big. I mean, they were athletes. His mom was an All-American sprinter. And his dad was just built like a bodybuilder. And like you see that guy with the type of genes that he's blessed with, but not just that, his work ethic is like second to none. And like I've never been around it. I mean, I always tell everybody stories like they always ask about APM, and I seen it with my own eyes. I mean, we would do conditioning, during the season. Everybody, they kind of put the conditioning on yourself, like to be accountable to do it, by position and stuff like that. And we would run gassers. And at the end of the sideline, there's this steep hill that runs up to the fence that kind of runs around our facility. And so we would run a half gasser and sprint up the hill. That's what we would do, like for our conditioning during the week. And none of us want to run in pads or helmet, nobody does, so we take shoulder pads, helmets off, and he stays in full gear. And this guy's beating us by like 20 yards. Like, everything's full speed. I kid you not, man. And then me and him, we kind of developed that relationship, and our coach, Eric Bieniemy at the time, he kind of made me, because even though like he was that type of player, he has a problem with forgetting things. But so he always used to tease us. He always used to call him my little brother. Like, where's your little brother at? Like, where's make sure you got a playbook and everything like that. Because even though as the greatest player he is, there were times where I had to babysit him and make sure, hey, be on time to meetings, bring your playbook and all that stuff. But I mean, that kid is just so gifted, and he's still doing it right now at the age of 35, 34, 35.
I think it was against the Saints last week.
Yeah.
That touchdown he had in the end zone, I was like, man,
still.
This dude trucked 3 people in the 35-yard line on a goal line. Right?
Yeah.
I was like, that's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and then another thing, so Thursdays he would come up to me. I don't know why I started doing it with him, but because I never run on the treadmill. And it'd be like, hey, after practice, Thursday practices, Wednesdays we'll run our gassers, and then Thursdays he told me, he's like, we'll go run a mile on the treadmill. And I was like, dude, I don't run. Like, I don't, so I was like, all right, whatever, because, he's telling me, he's like, you gotta do this. He's like, come on, you gotta do this with me. And so Thursdays we start doing a mile on the treadmill, and here I am, I'm like, 4.5 speed, jogging, turning it down as it gets. This guy starts at 7 miles an hour and finishes, instead of going down, he goes up. So he finished his mile at 9 miles an hour. And I'm like, man, that's not human. You know what? I was like, how do you do it? You're not tired. But man, I've never seen anything like it. And like, even still to this day, like, because of the position I played and where I played, everybody else, hey, rank your top backs. Like, what do you put, for me, I'm always just like, Barry Sanders and Adrian Peterson. Those are because no one ever could do what Barry Sanders did, and if he didn't retire early, it'd be his record we'd be talking about. Mm-hmm. And Adrian Peterson, because is my number 2, because I've just never seen anybody physically athletic as him with his size, being 6'2", 6'3", and 220 pounds, run as fast as he did, have a quick first step like he did, and just to do it like consistently, like through his career. I mean, here's a quick story people don't know. Because of the type of running back and how physical and built he is, people don't know how good of a basketball player that guy is. And we used to tease him when we go out and play pickup basketball at the gym, because we all had gym memberships to the same gym, like the same rack, lifetime. And this guy would come play basketball, pick up basketball in a weighted vest. 20 pounds, 25 pound vest, and still dunking on people. In a weighted vest, man. It's crazy. It's crazy.
I think for Adrian Peterson, people are really lucky, or we are really unlucky that we didn't get to see him play in the 90s, where all he did was tote the rock. You know what I mean? Because something I've always loved seeing about him was, it's one thing for like a big guy to like make a move here and there. It's another thing where I think whenever he was a rookie, you guys were playing, I want to say it's the Detroit Lions, and he broke through the line and he was one-on-one with the safety. Oh, yeah. And then he gave the little double tap. And I was like, bro, you're 230 and you're making those type of moves.
Exactly.
And then for the longest time, I was just like, man, it's always been like fun to see him play, and just being a huge fan of the game has always been cool for me. So let's kind of fast forward now. You got to play with guys like him. Were you there when Brett Favre was the quarterback? Yeah. And so you played with these guys. You had, I think you played in the league, 7 years? Was that? Six years. Coming to the end of football, what was the determining factor where you kind of said, it's like, okay, I think I'm going to hang him up now and start transitioning into the next part of your life?
So when I left Minnesota, I missed the whole year after with the lockout. The lockout was a tough time for veterans about my age group, and so the lockout was, a lot of us ended up missing that year, and so I missed that year, and then I signed back on at a few teams calling to come back, and I ended up signing with the Jaguars. And I go over there and have a really good start, OTAs during the spring and stuff like that, and I have a good start to camp. And then I have a pinched nerve down my back, and that's kind of what just, after sitting out the year and then going, and then staying in shape and working hard. But, that going to Jacksonville was probably the best shape I'd ever been in, during my NFL career at that time, because I had all that time to focus and eat better. I mean, and that was probably the one time that I could sit there and say that I hired somebody, a nutritionist, to make my food for me, to the T. From the time that I woke up to the time that I went to bed, everything was, in place. And so I go to camp. I weighed 265, and like my body weight, I'm like at 90% body fat, and running well, feeling good, and all that stuff. But I mean, up here, it just started to slow down a little bit, And mentally, I think and I kind of mentioned it to you earlier. I started to slow down mentally as far, and then just like the feel for the game. And then when that happened with my back, they sent me home they asked me if I wanted to do surgery there and to do therapy. And during that time, it just sounded like they were going to put me on IR because of it. I asked them if I could go home and just do the rehab and stuff like that. I was in the middle of a divorce, and I was kind of dealing with my own issues mentally, and then not seeing my kids and stuff like that was kind of a tough break. And so they gave me that option to come back. And so when I came back to rehab before going back to Jacksonville, like I didn't go back. I just told them, I was like, I'm not taking any money. I'm not asking for money. I'm just done playing football. And they were like trying to talk me out of it to get me to go back because to them, I had, was competing with the guy that was there to beat him out. And they were wanting me to beat him out because they were paying him so much money. Mm-hmm. And we were about the same age. And we were the same age, age-wise, but as far as career, because of the mission, he was 2-3 years ahead. Greg Jones, he was a running back from Florida State, and so they were kind of pushing him out. And then he ended up going to the Texans. But I just told him, I was like, there was a lot of money for a 1-year deal. There was a lot of money on the table, and the money couldn't even do it for me. Like I just, in my head, I missed my kids, and I found out, my older son was diagnosed with epilepsy, dealing with that, all at the same time. A divorce, my son, having epilepsy, me questioning whether football is still a thing, and like dealing with my own mental issue type, which I didn't know at the time, and just trying to figure out what was next and stuff like that if I did decide to walk away. But at the time, I think even though I didn't have anything in mind, whether it was going to be still in football or coaching or whatever, I still didn't know. I just knew that I was done playing it. And so it was nice that I made it because it was on my own terms, and I think how my body was breaking down, and even as good of a shape that I was in, and still having to deal with like body injuries and issues like that was just kind of disappointing, and it was time. It was just time. And so when it was time for me to go back, I was just told them, I was like, I'm done. I'm not coming back.
Man, just thinking about the things you were probably going through at the time, must have been just draining. There's probably no energy left for football at that point. And so getting into that dark place, what would you say was the thing that got you out of it? Or like who were the people or mentors that kind of like helped pull you along?
Yeah. I fell on a lot of people, my family, obviously, and right now, my wife now, it's kind of where our relationship had gone on and started a couple of years previous. And so my wife right now, she's been my rock, and like through our relationship through that time, while we were dating and stuff like that, I fell on her a lot, and during that time, going through my divorce, my wife right now, she was the first person that I called to tell that I was done, and I cried about it, but I felt good about it, and I talked to her. We kind of had established our friendship relationship already while going through my divorce and all that stuff, and so. But my family, my siblings, mostly my siblings and my mom. They kind of helped me through that, and they knew that there was a lot more going on mentally with me than there was. And football used to be the thing that I used to remember when I would deal with issues and stuff like that. And football hit a lot of things for me, But I think at that time there was so much reality was catching up everywhere. There was so much going on that football couldn't do it anymore. And I think it was just to the point where I was tired mentally and physically. Where and even man, and you can ask anybody that plays it, and they're a liar if they deny it. But even when you're making millions and stuff like that, and you're sitting in training camp going through that first week, even still, then you're thinking in my head, man, do I want to be doing this? I hate this.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of always have that time during camp, I want to be done, But that time for me, it was different. I didn't think about the physical part. Man, I don't want to be doing it. I was just I really don't want to play football no more. And so from that time when I felt when I had those feelings, and there were feelings that I never recognized before. I was like, man, it's time. I'm not only dealing with it physically, but the mental part of it is not there. And I knew that too because. Eric Bieniemy, he'll tell everybody, and I used to hate when he would tell everybody. He would tell everybody, I'm the smartest guy on the offense because, I would sit there in our meeting rooms, we talked through blitzes, coverages, and all that stuff, and I could tell you what everybody was doing from receivers, the whole line, and back to the running backs and stuff like that. And I knew that our playbook that well. And then when I got to Jacksonville, it just wasn't the same drive,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't put it. I was trying to put in the time. But it felt like I was, more of an effort. I was pushing myself more than I wanted to. And so, when all that came to, I had to rely on my family and, just seeing my kids and being away from them and stuff like that was tough. And so, but going through that dark time and being with them, being able to be home and close to them and stuff like that is kind of what helped me and try to figure out what was next.
Man, I can't stress enough how having a supportive partner can be, especially in trying times. I remember, so with me and my wife, we haven't gone through anything traumatic, but with the podcast and me starting, she knows how big of a sports nerd I am.
Yeah.
And, I'll be on Facebook commenting 250, just going back and forth with people I don't even know that well. And she's like, man, it's you waste your time on Facebook arguing for free. Why don't you just try to go make yourself something of it? And at first, I was so conscious, man, people will see me on camera. They're this guy doesn't know anything, he didn't play anything or do this and that. And then she's like, well, at the end of the day, no one's opinion really matters. If you can bring a value to a certain, group of people, he's like, then that's all that's all you really need. And then, it's you don't need to worry about your intent because personally we know you. We know what your intent is. And so, don't, because I've had this idea for 2 or 3 years now.
Yeah.
I just never put pen to paper and actually pushed it out. And then when the pandemic hit, I was staying at home on unemployment, and she was like, if you don't do anything during this unemployment, I don't want to hear any shoulda, coulda, wouldas, right? And so she kind of gave me the push I kind of needed to end up starting. And, I dropped the first episode and I'm so conscious, man, I freaking sucked on that one. And so, but, I just go back and a lot of times she'll come back and, critique me and say, hey, so I noticed when you did this, you said this a certain way, maybe to portray how you actually feel, this is how you actually felt, so say it this way. And I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot more sense. And I can't stress enough if I never had her to kind of push me to do what I really wanted to do, instead of, because right now I work at the airport for Delta on the ramp, and as chill and nice of a job that is, there's no sense of fulfillment for me while I work there. And I wanted to do something that feels I add value, bring, helping people, or help, like just telling people stories. I think a lot of people can learn from these experiences. So for you, you had all these experiences, and how did you eventually get into coaching after all of this had happened?
Yeah, like I said, everything was up in the air. I know I had talked with a few people who had asked me what was next, and I had reached out to some people also, to Eric Bieniemy as well too, just about coaching and stuff like that, and then coming back home and being at home, I helped a little bit at my alma mater over at Granger High School, and then a lot of people started to hear that I was back and done playing and coaching, and they told me, you need to do this, and go coach over here, go be the head coach over here. Everybody has a great idea and stuff, and then from there, I still stayed in touch with my running back coach at BYU, and I was still close with him. And so he invited me to come down, and he would tell me, it's like, just come volunteer, or if you want to come sit on the meetings, it's like, I could use your help and stuff like that. And so I started to go out on the BYU and help them. I would be on the sidelines a little bit, kind of help out with the backs, just volunteering, and from there, the offensive line coach at the time, Mark Weber, he ended up leaving BYU and on to Utah State. And like that week he got the job, he called me. He's like, hey, you trying to get into coaching still? And I was like, yeah, everything's still up in the air. I'm not really doing anything right now. And so he's like, come up here and hang out and see if you like it and all that stuff and whatever. And so anyways, I went up there. I ended up interviewing with Coach Wells for an analyst job, and then he gave me the job, like pretty much that day. And so from then on, I loved it. I went up to Utah State, and I was up there for 5 years with the running backs, and then, but it's just fun to go back just to try to help. But even still going in there and then even having played, I think a big part of it was they seen my experience as far as a player and all that stuff, and then just trying to transition, the change like mentality from being a player to a coach. You got to approach it a little bit different because now you're not the guy anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You got to coach the guy, but I saw it took me a little bit to try to figure out that gauge of trying to. And so I've always, from being around Eric, people don't know, but like he's intense. I mean, there have been times like I had to break him and Adrian, but I had to get in between those two guys from getting into it, like, getting physical and stuff. But he's so passionate and intense about because he loves the game and what he does. I used to catch myself that way. I mean, because I used to be, which was weird because I was never an intense, loud player. I just was put my helmet on, quiet, and go run a few people over and stuff like that. Yeah, but as far as coaching, it was different. I was a different person. I was very passionate about the game, but I was very intense, and I just wanted to give out all the information I had possible to those kids to help them in any way that it could, and just try to better them and stuff like that. And man, I learned so much about myself and about them along the way, and about coaching and stuff like that. And it was such a good experience for me, and I loved it and I enjoyed it. And it was too bad, it was sad having to leave and stuff. But man, coaching was the closest thing that I could do to still be on the field and not play, And so being able to share, all the memories, good and bad, with those kids and stuff like that, and share my experience and kind of help them along the way was a huge help for me and stuff like that, as far as transitioning from playing for so long to being a coach now.
Oh man, no, that's awesome. I always think, especially for coaches who have firsthand experience playing in the league, there's little things that guys who didn't play can actually bring value to a lot of these players. And so I always like seeing guys who who've actually done it before they actually come and start coaching. With that being said, man, it's just good to know that like you're probably in a lot better place than you were those years ago. And so now that you've gotten to this place of where you're a lot more healthier mentally, physically, what would you say in terms of to those guys who are getting ready to transition out of the NFL, and then also for kids who are, wanting to make this a career choice? What would your advice be to them as well?
This is hard work. And again, I was talking about Eric Bieniemy because the influence he's had on my career, not just playing, but also coaching. And, I became, when I was playing, and I'll say this because I've seen it. There's so many guys that go in from playing in the NFL that think it's so easy to just transition over, or like think that jobs are going to be handed to them because of what their position and where they came from, that it's so easy to coach. But I mean, it's a lot harder than you think it is. And I can tell you that it's not always easy. Not because you play in the NFL doesn't mean you're going to be a good coach. It doesn't mean that you're going to know everything and do everything. And for me personally, because I knew I was a good coach because of the time that I put in, and this started while I was playing. And you have to be a student of the game to be as good a player and to last as long as you want in the NFL. You got to know every bit of what's going on the field. And so even though as a fullback and situational times, being a short yardage back or a third down back, where I did third down back stuff because of protection and because I knew blitzes and all that stuff. And even though EB would always say Fahu's the smartest guy in the room because he knows everything that's going on from the X receiver all the way down to the Y and Z and stuff like that, which I did, but it's what made me successful. And he taught me how to break things down from watching film to breaking things down because I'll be honest, I didn't do it very much in college. I just relied on my physical ability to be successful, but that can only take you so far. And so I had to become a student of the game where I think I became so passionate about it that I was watching, I tried to give as much time as I could for my kids when I got home because I got home later in the evening. But as soon as I got done with that, I would watch film till late at night. And so when we would line up at our opponents, whether it was the Bears or Green Bay Packers, I knew the personnel, I knew their tendencies, I knew the defense, and I knew exactly the looks that they would come in the blitzes and stuff like that. I already knew what was coming before they lined up, and stuff like that. And but that was because, and the reason why I became a good coach and what I did was because I had put time and work into it to know and understand those things, but from him, and because I seen how dedicated he was, he would tell me, we would sit there and have talks, and he would tell me he would be in the office till 2 or 3 in the morning, and then he'd be back in the office at 5. And I was just like, man, that's obsession, but he was that smart, and it's no surprise to see what he's doing. He won a Super Bowl as Kansas City Chiefs offensive coordinator, and he's up for a bunch of head coaching jobs. But that's the advice that I would give to these guys is don't think that the transition is going to be easy because you played football so long in your life and that you played in the NFL. You got to put time in. You got to change the switch, and you've got to think like a coach. You've got to study more than you did when you were a player, because as a player, you study things. You study from your position, and that's it. But from a coach, you got to study from the whole field, and you got to see. You got to see and know everything, from the back end, from the front to the back end of the defense and all that stuff. And so, I feel that's what helped me be able to do well in my coaching career, even though it wasn't very long and stuff like that. But I felt like that's why I was good at what I did.
All right, man. Thank you Well, we'll go ahead and close with that, and it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast today.
Thank you, man. I just want to tell you, man, like your wife said, just keep doing you, man. And I love your show and I appreciate it. And for me, it's good because I get to see guys in my situation and guys that I grew up with, like Shona and Reno, and come on here and tell their stories, man. So man, from the outside looking in, I just tell you, I appreciate your show, your podcast. Keep doing what you're doing. Because this is a good thing, man. I think guys like us, we need to get out and tell our stories. And you're allowing that. You're giving us that opportunity by doing this. So thank you.
All right, man. Go ahead and